Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's transit report starting on Monday, June 3rd. And let's take a look at what we've got going on here. So the sun is still traveling through gate 35. It's in line 3 today, putting the Earth in gate 5, line 3. And also want to mention that we are closing up this lunar cycle. And I think that's something I really wanted to bring to the table this morning, just to remind us that we're having a new moon in Gemini on this Thursday, which will be part of this transit report. But between Monday and Thursday, we're at the final moments, days, hours, degrees of the new moon that we had in Taurus. And so because of that, I just want to remind us where we started a month ago, that we're wrapping up, right? The new moon is, I always think of it like the 12 chapters of the book of the year, and they can really point us in the direction of the themes that we're going through. And as I've been talking about for months now, we have been having an overwhelming amount of individual gates activated. It's really been extraordinary. In fact, so much so, Brandy and I decided we're going to do a talk on the lunar cycles for 2024 because we're almost halfway through the year. And we just wanted to bring this to the table to show you guys what we've been observing by looking at the new moon and the full moons. But let's just focus in on the Taurus new moon that we're wrapping up right now. And once again, you can see that we had two individual channels, the channel of initiation and the channel of inspiration. And Uranus still in gate 23, which will also, Uranus is going to exit gate 23 this week. So I'll be mentioning that again shortly. And at the new moon, we had the sun and the moon in gate 2, the gate of higher knowing. So there's just been this continual drumbeat since the Rave New Year. And in fact, at the Rave New Year, the only channel activated for that chart was the channel of the perfected form, a design of survival. So we have definitely been getting stimulated at a very deep inner core of who each of us are. And whether or not you've had all of the individual gates that have been activating, we can certainly say that whatever individual gates and channels you may have certainly been getting incredible stimulation. And so that's why I really feel like this is the setup to this evolutionary shift happening in 2027. It just has been leaping off of the chart. And so I think it's wonderful for contemplation. You know, how have you been experiencing the individual circuitry in your body graph, and what have we learned so far this year? So this is where we started. Yeah, this is the lunar cycle that we're wrapping up right now. And then after the new moon that we had on May 23rd, we had the full moon. Oops, here it is. We had a full moon in Sagittarius, and here again, we had the channel of initiation and the channel of charisma, a design where thoughts must become deeds. So it's when we do this talk and line all of the new moon, full moon charts up, it's just so statistically improbable. That's one way to say it, but somewhat shocking in the sense of how strong this theme of individuality has been. So that brings us to today. So with the moon traveling through Taurus over the next couple of days, this is also, we are just now today entering what we call the balsamic moon in these final 45 degrees before the new moon. And so overall, at the start of this week, wonderful time to reflect on this month. You know, what experiences took place. I think one of the things, if you've had, because we're having this, again, intense individual stimulation, any challenges you've had this past month, things that may have dysregulated you in any way, whether they got you angry or sad or whatever, almost like an altercation. I think any of those moments this past month are worth reviewing right now, because they may indicate areas where we still need to heal inside of ourselves. I mean, anytime somebody triggers us in that way, where we feel those intense emotions and dysregulation, There's something inside of us that still needs some reflection and support, right? Because if we're living out our fullest, authentic, true self, there shouldn't be any reason that we feel debilitated in that sense. I mean, certainly someone like myself, I have a defined emotional solar plexus and I have my waves and so forth. But if I was dysregulated in the way that I'm describing it this past month, this is a wonderful time to reflect on that. You know, Chiron continues this past month. I mentioned it quite a bit in the transit reports because Mars was conjunct Chiron just last week. There were some other significant aspects to Chiron being in gate 42, and that's all coming on the heels of the total solar new moon eclipse that we had in Aries on April 8th. So these were really, again, very stimulating times that if they brought things up, we still had the energy to resolve them, to heal for them, maybe to offer forgiveness to the people involved or to ourselves. But again, so much of the framework of this period of time is the development of our individual nature, our voice of truth, and our own personal inspiration. Wonderful, fertile soil right now to be contemplating these things. So that's the first thing this week. We're in this closing of this lunar cycle in a time of relaxation and reflection on Monday. Other significant things going on, if we look at the sign of Gemini, Mercury just joined the stellium in Gemini early this morning. This would have happened just after 1 a.m. Mercury is the ruler of Gemini, and he's now joining Jupiter, Venus, and the Sun. So also something that's been quite a pattern since the Rave New Year is that this is going to be our 5th new moon of the Rave year. And every one of those, first in Aquarius, then Pisces, then Aries, then Taurus, and now Gemini, we have had a stellium or more. Stellium means 3 planets. We have had between 3 to 5 planets at the time of the new moon in the sign that the new moon is. So for all of this year so far, we've continued to have this conflagration, I guess I might use that word, or this large clumping of the planets as we've been going through the year so far. And so we're going to have that again at this new moon. Now, after this cycle, the planets will finally begin to spread out again. So we're not going to have such a concentration. But I think one of the things we can say about that is that each sign of the lunar cycle has been heavily emphasizing the sign that it's in because we have multiple planets. So this is quite a lineup here to have Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and the Sun. So that would be the second thing. The third thing I would bring up for today is that the Jupiter was just exactly trine Pluto as of yesterday. I mentioned this last week in the transit report because this is a slow-moving transit. So it was part of last week's theme, and it'll be part of this week's theme. And again, the exact moment of that trine was yesterday, but Jupiter being at 2 degrees Gemini is still very close to the 1 degrees of Aquarius that Pluto is in. And Jupiter is in gate 20, and Mercury has also just moved into gate 20. So you can see there in Gemini, we're going to have a Mercury conjunct Jupiter, and the Venus is already conjuncting the Sun as well. They're both at 13 degrees because the Sun moves a little bit slower. Venus is very slow in catching up to the Sun. So that exact conjunction will not be for a couple days. However, they are part of the background energy of this entire week. So let me break some of those down. And again, I'll mention them now, and I might bring them up as we go through each day of the week, but it's certainly there all week. So the first one being Jupiter trine Pluto, and Jupiter being in gate 20 and Pluto being in gate 60. Jupiter is the planet of good fortune, of expansion, particularly the planet of benevolence. You know, all Jupiter transits tend to be what we might consider good things. However, sometimes too much of a good thing can be too much. You know, this is kind of like having a party that goes on for too long. And this actually kind of funny, I think, is all those planets in Gemini would make a great week for a party. I mean, Venus and the love and beauty and harmony lining up with a conjunction with the sun, always one of the most beautiful conjunctions every year. It's in the sign of Gemini, about communication and friends and family, short travel, just a very creative, mutable air and adaptive sign. So these are two big conjunctions. They're actually happening on the same day, actually tomorrow. It's actually Tuesday, when those two conjunctions will be exact. But just to go back to this Jupiter trine Pluto. Now, there's several reasons I think this is very interesting. One being, of course, they're both in individual gates. And Pluto has been dealing with gate 60 for a long time. We're going back almost 2 years ago. Pluto traveled all the way through gate 60. It went into gate 41. It's now in retrograde, so recently has moved back into gate 60. Pluto will continue retrograde all the way back to 60 line 4, where he will station and move forward again in November of this year. So again, a lot of gate 60 activation from Pluto, which has brought us the channel of mutation off and on for all of that period of time. In fact, we're going to have it again this week when Mars moves into gate 3. So these two individual gates being stimulated by each other in a supportive, free-flowing trine. So when I think of Jupiter and its benevolent expansion in the throat gate of 20, in the integration field, the gate of now, existential in the moment, I think this is going to be a wonderful time with all these planets in Gemini this coming lunar cycle to think about to listen to ourselves, right? We know there's going to be a lot of activity in a mutable air sign. There's going to be a lot of conversations, a lot of chatter. And we're going through a deep metamorphic individual period of time. And so as we are changing on the inside from these stimulations, and of course, we want to be honoring our personal strategy and personal authority to navigate all of these transits, but we are going through a deep transmutive time individually. And so I think with all this Gemini energy, very helpful during this period to listen to our stories that we're saying. Right? How are we talking about something? Do we like what we're hearing? Right? Because the stimulation is there to communicate, but our story is changing, or at least I see that as the invitation. We have had the channel of initiation almost for 2 months off and on. And so we've been offering this invitation to be initiated into our higher sense of personal truth. And as we go through this change, how are we talking about it? What are we liking what we hear? Because we are going through this change and it's time to change our stories. Again, part of that healing process that Chiron brought to the table when it was exactly conjunct the total solar eclipse in April to the minute. So there was this deep chironic period of time, this deep individual stimulation. And as these changes are happening, I think it's important to listen to ourselves and possibly reframe these, right? How have we learned? How have we grown? Chiron in gate 42, which is where Mars still is as of today. It'll be moving to gate 3 this week. But having Mars and Chiron in the gate of growth in the formatting channel of sensing circuitry, this is the channel of maturation. And so these healing cathartic experiences and the energy of Mars, we have the opportunity to move into a new growth phase. And that's all surrounding all this individual circuitry that I've been speaking about. So with Jupiter in 20 and Pluto in gate 60. Now it is in retrograde. So we're going to be dealing with this Plutonic energy in the gate of limitations. So that we're, it's like we're not out of this yet. But what I want to share, I think, is my reflection on this right now is how am I reviewing and analyzing what I may have considered to be my greatest limitation. Wherever we might be experiencing any degree of fear, doubt, and insecurity right now, these are wonderful indicators from the universe to remind us to go inward. If I'm being triggered, there's something still in me I haven't let go. I haven't forgiven. I'm still holding on to. And so we have all of this supportive energy to move beyond that. And I think that's what the message here is, that there is an opportunity to do that. It's almost like Jupiter's trine is bringing this benevolent, expansive, supportive frequency to grow in how we are expressing ourselves in the now. And I think it's not only is Jupiter making that trine right now, but Mercury is right on the heels of that. So Mercury, as I said, just moved into gate 20, line 1 to join Jupiter. And over the next day or two, Mercury is also going to be making this trine to Pluto. And the fact that Pluto is retrograde in gate 60, right? Retrograde means review, reanalyze, rethink, reprogram, all of the rewords. How can we alchemize this fear, doubt, insecurity? Where did it come from? Where did it start? Was it childhood? Was it our parents, our siblings? Wherever these old wounds come from, we're getting support right now to move beyond them, to alchemize what may have been our greatest limitation into one of our greatest gifts. That, as we know from the channel of maturation, right, we can develop maturity from that. We can grow beyond that. And so in that sense, it's a really, really beneficial time. I think it's very supportive. And I think one of the key words of this whole lunar cycle, to me, is adaptability. That's a very Gemini word. All of these conjunctions and that trine to Jupiter coming from Gemini, which is the mutable air, it does offer this opportunity to adapt, to be very adaptable. And I think that's a skill that we all want to cultivate right now, not only because of how much individual stimulation we've been having, but as we continue to move through this year and next, having that sense of adaptability in these individual gates can be very supportive. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to Tuesday and track these through the week here. Okay, on Tuesday, the Mercury exactly conjunct Jupiter in gate 20, line 3. That happens at 4:15 a.m. tomorrow morning. 20, line 3, in the gate of the now is called the line of self-awareness. And it's line 3, which we also know is the line of adaptability, the line of experience, the line that tries every possible mutation within the hexagram. So this line of self-awareness, so that that's where I was really speaking around, talking about this gate 20 trining 60. And then later in the morning tomorrow, at 10:15 a.m. is when Venus will be precisely conjunct the sun, which will be happening in gate 35, line 4, which is where you can see, yeah, so that's where we do have the sun here in this chart. The line of hunger. Now, we have been having so much individual activations during every new moon cycle, but we're, for the first time, going to get a collective gate at the new moon on Thursday. So just to give you a preview, I'm heading towards this gate 35 again. When it gets to line 6, that's going to be the new moon in Gemini. But what I want to point out, on Tuesday, we can see that the Mars has moved into gate 3, line 1 in the latter degrees of Aries. So he's wrapping up his movement through his home sign and bringing us the channel of mutation, gate 3 to gate 60. These two gates are exactly square to the minute in the astrological wheel. And we know that this is the format energy of all individual circuitry. And again, this will be the only channel that we have at the new moon. So we'll, from Tuesday here, we're going to have this all the way till June 12th. So my contemplations for this, again, just sort of adding on to what I've shared briefly, is just that we are definitely being invited to mutate as who we are and deal with things as they are in a flexible, Gemini, mutable, adaptable way to evolve into this new sense of truth for ourselves. Particularly, I think, All of this individual circuitry offers us to find our personal creativity. We've been going through a year here where it's not about following anyone else's direction. It's about following your voice of truth, not only from a human design personal authority standpoint, but also from all the gates and channels that we've been having. So this channel of mutation is really intense because not only is it Pluto in gate 60, but Mars, right? Mars, the god of war, the planet with all that energy in his home sign. It's really dynamic. Now, when we look at transits from more of a collective perspective, because transits are the weather, we know that we each meet that weather with our own authority. When we have a storm pass through your town, it affects everybody differently. Some people may have real bad damage to their house or yard. Some people might get a sprinkle. So of course, we have to look at how these transits are impacting your personal natal chart to see where this really specifically fits into your life. But I'm saying all that because Pluto and Mars squaring in the sky is typically a very difficult time on the collective scale. In fact, when Mars last squared Pluto, that was on October 7th, which was the actual day that Hamas invaded Israel and launched this horrific war that we are still dealing with. So now then we had the Mars-Pluto conjunction, and now we're having the opening square Mars to Pluto. So again, I think we'll just have to see what happens this week on those collective, perspectives. But I really like to look at these transits personally from an individual perspective. And again, what we're seeing is incredibly Mars energetic, powerful stimulation of frequency in our channel of mutation. And so just think that's a wonderful contemplation as you look at your own individual gates and channels. How do you see this playing out? Where do you feel the stimulating events coming from with your interactions with other people, and what can we learn from them? If you have these emotionally charged interactions, where can we grow and learn from them? And I think that was the message of the Chiron Mars conjunction when it was in 42. And then also, so later in the day tomorrow, the moon is going to conjunct Uranus. Now, I think what's important here is that Uranus has been in gate 23 since last May. So we're over a year with Uranus solely in gate 23. And I say that because Uranus did its retrograde phase, and it was all still within gate 23. It came into gate 23, went all the way to line 4, then it went retrograde back to line 1, and now it's finally in line 6, about to leave gate 23. Now, it will actually leave gate 23 for a few months, and it will come back again. I think it's in December. I don't have the date right in front of me, but it's going to dip back into 23 very briefly. So we're going to get a little more taste of this, but we're certainly through the bulk of it. And so, as I've also shared in a number of transit reports, I think this is such a wonderful contemplation. Uranus being the planet of innovation, forward thinking, sudden, shocking. To me, I always think of lightning when I think of Uranus. It just brings this shocking, sudden change that can move us into the future because it's very connected to Aquarius and technology and the future of society, these types of thematics. But I think Uranus really resonates with individual circuitry itself, this deeply mutative circuitry, this self-empowering idea. And so I think with Uranus here, my contemplation this week, because it's, as I said, it's going to be leaving 23, is how has our gate 23, again, whether or not it's defined or not, it's still stimulating whatever individual circuitry you have. And while we've had this transit, we may have felt a Uranian shift in what our the channel of individuality, also called the channel of structuring, how we've been able to assimilate our new expression of ourselves. And so I think, again, that's that's a fun one to think about as Uranus wraps up this long time period in gate 23. And so with the moon on Tuesday afternoon will be conjunct to Uranus. This is the last time that will happen during this phase. In December, when Uranus dips back in there, there'll be one more moon conjunction. But just to say, this is the last of 13 moon conjunctions, okay? Bringing the lunar emotional inner drive to Uranus in 23. Again, a wonderful contemplation on Tuesday evening. How we may have been experiencing this gate and what the moon conjunction with Uranus there will be like. And again, we're in the final couple days of the lunar cycle. So reflecting and using your creativity, like these last few days of the lunar cycle are so important to relax, to rest, rejuvenate, to integrate what this cycle has been for us with these deep individual stimulations. And here we have the emotional energy lining up with Uranus in Taurus in 23 to ground ourselves through this ending of this emotional cycle of experience. So I think that's an important one for Tuesday. And again, just as I'm glancing at the 4 planets in Gemini, we can see those conjunctions there in those individual gates. So when we think about gate 23, gate 20, and the channel of mutation, another fun exercise to see how those gates might relate to your chart and where you see these developments happening in each of these gates. When we get to Wednesday, June 5th, so we're on the last day before the new moon, which will take place on Thursday. The moon in Gemini, of course. So this is what's giving us this 5-planet stellium in this sign. So again, we can just, with the keynotes I've shared about Gemini and all of these planets, how powerful this sign is as we're leading into this new moon. So very heavy emphasis here. And let's go ahead and move to the new moon. If you look at my chart, it says mini. It's because it was Gemini and I made too long of a title for it. So this is not a mini full moon. I can tell you that. This is a big, well, and also it says full moon. So the whole title got messed up. So I apologize for that. Didn't have time to change it this morning. Gemini new moon, June 6th, 6:37 a.m. And that is Mountain Time where I live. So let's break this chart down. Again, have been talking about the channel of mutation, how powerful that channel is right now. Mars gate 3 line 2 and Pluto gate 60 line 6. Now Pluto in line 6 is really resonating with this new moon because the new moon and the sun are in gate 35 line 6. So when we have a new moon in line 6, of course, we're thinking about line 6, the role model, the wise role model, the line of truth and integrity, and it's in a collective gate of expression. And so I think with all of the individual activations for the previous new moons, to have the new moon lining up with its conjunction to the sun in a collective gate of expression, to me, this indicates this cycle is where we're making this change. Now we're moving into this area is how are we expressing our unique sense of individuality and this new version of truth that we may have come about through these initiating experiences? How are we sharing that with others? How are we talking about our life? If we hear things coming out that we don't even like the sound of, well, that's a great indicator. I need to look at this. How can I change this? How can I heal, integrate, and move beyond what I did consider to be a limiting, insecure factor in my life? And I think that's part of this message of Gate 35 called the Gate of Progress. It's also in the primary manifesting channel, the channel of transitoriness, a design of a jack of all trades. Again, it speaks to this development, right? Gate 35, where have we experienced progress? Where do we need to maybe double down, again, according to our authority? How do we need to evolve with this idea of progress and how we're sharing our individual experience with the collective? And also, as of the new moon, Mercury has moved into gate 16, right? We have all these throat gates in Gemini, just one after the other. So with Mercury now in gate 16 and the south node in gate 48, we're going to have the channel of the wavelength, a design of talent. So even just looking at this chart and trying to break down some of the elements, it is a deeply individual mutative stimulation to examine how we're expressing our individual truth and inspiration in terms of progress. Where are we at right now in our life? If we're not where we feel our inner authority wants to be, how are we moving there? How are we getting there? And how can we share that in a very talented way? Mercury, the planet of communication, in its home sign. That's why I was saying earlier, I think really just listening to our conversations and not just being all yang, just talk, but really listening to what we're saying, we're going to hear indicators of what we need to look at for this lunar cycle. And so I think that's a big part of this new moon here. So if you look back at the sign of Gemini, you can see that Venus, the sun, moon, Venus, all at 16 degrees, all in that 35 line 6. I forget the name of that line, but let me just look it up real quick. Yeah, the line of rectification, the energy to correct. Well, that's kind of what I was talking about earlier here, right? Line 6 is here to be the integrity, to the example, the role model of what progress looks like. And if it doesn't look like progress, it's the ability to rectify, the energy to correct. And that's where we are right now. All of these months of intense individual stimulation, Chiron was coming at us in a big way. Where are we with that progress? How do we hear ourselves expressing it? That can be the indicator. And then I think for the whole lunar cycle itself, how are we adapting? And I want to re-mention that to me, that's the theme of the lunar cycle. How are we being adaptable and mutating into our highest version of truth and inspiration? So wonderful tailwinds, lots of support to be moving in this highest version of our inspiration and personal expression. The one challenging thing we're going to be looking at now that we're moving into the second half of the week, first is the new moon itself, conjunct Venus, is in a square and a half to Pluto. So we can see how the new moon itself and the Venus are really getting pulled into this channel of mutation. And so that's where we may, again, have these stimulations or altercations or just these events that do feel frictional. A square and a half is very similar to a square itself. It is a red hot dynamic energy. It's important because these aspects promote growth and change and evolution. So it's not that they're like bad, the way we subjectively view things. It's just that they're very stimulating. And I think that's just bringing emphasis to where I was trying to describe this channel of mutation. It is intricately linked because of this square and a half to the degree, the 1 degree of Aquarius and the 16 of Gemini, that's to the degree in a square and a half. So again, this idea of gate 60, how we're still dealing with how do we mutate and move beyond that. Additionally, after the new moon, and you'll see this in a couple charts as I wrap up the week, Venus, Sun, Moon, all at 16 degrees, they're going to begin forming a square to Saturn in Pisces. And Saturn is still in gate 22. And Saturn is really slowing down right now. Saturn's going to turn retrograde at the end of June. And as he slows down to stop and turn backwards, there's hardly any movement. So he's going to be in gate 22 here this whole time. But yet again, another individual gate. And I think that'll be sort of if there's bumps in the road this week or stimulations that cause us to pause and recognize, remember that it's Saturn, and Saturn is here as the taskmaster. And when Saturn is squaring planets, he is asking although Saturn usually feels like he's demanding because he's not really interested in our giddy happiness. He's interested in us maturing. And so they can often feel, bumps in the road that may make us stop. But I think that square is Venus. She's at 16 degrees, right? So over the next couple days, each of these planets, Venus, Sun, Moon, and Mercury, all of those moving relatively quickly relative to the other planets, are all one after the other in succession going to form this square to Saturn. And so in that sense, once we get from the new moon on Thursday through Sunday for this report, we may again experience these limitations. How has my individuality, gate 22, the gate of grace, this is the emotional energy to express ourselves as individuals. How am I experiencing limitations there? How do I need to adapt? How do I need to evolve? Just to examine, I think, what that energy feels like as we move up to and through the weekend. Okay, so as we go into Friday, the sun is going to move into gate 45, and the earth, that puts the polarity of the earth in gate 26. Because the north node is in gate 21, this is what's bringing us the channel of the money line, a design of a materialist. So once again, it's like, from a collective perspective, this can be a pretty challenging channel, right? Because we're thinking 45, maybe leaders of countries and so forth, or people that are in charge of us, either in the workplace or wherever. We can feel that control, right? The north node in gate 21. I think on a collective scale, this again looks like a bit of a challenging stimulation. But to me, that again, the remembering there is to be reminded that where we're experiencing limitations and challenges from others, what does this mean for us? Why do I feel that way? And it's going to be, speaking of feeling, the moon by Friday has moved into Cancer. So she's in her home sign. So she has full access to all of her frequencies while she's in her sign of rulership. But it also is very stimulating in that sense. So we might be feeling this by Friday, that these limitations we may feel from authority figures other places, or the Saturn that's squaring these planets, we may feel restriction here, but to me, that's an opportunity. That is an invitation. Why is it there? How did it get here? Is it something I need to deal with or evolve on the inside, or is it something I need to let go, right? It could be that as we evolve in our individual truth and expression, we may have to examine relationships. And so we may be feeling these things, I think, in the second part of this week. And as the moon travels through Cancer, she's going to be forming semi-sextiles with all the planets in Gemini. So even on Friday at 2 degrees Cancer, that's a semi-sextile exactly to the Jupiter in gate 20. So that semi-sextile with the moon, this way creates some of these uneasy feelings. Semi-sextile is confusing. It's irritating. Any signs that are next door to each other have nothing in common. They're different elements, different modalities. There's just no frame of reference, right? And so with the moon, those first few days after the new moon, it's like we're trying to get our footing, with our feelings. It can be a little stimulating and confusing. But again, I think all we can do is just remember what's going on here. We are being mutated. So anything uncomfortable is like a little warning light on the car that comes up, like, check your oil. Check your insides, do your techniques that ground yourself, breathing, connecting with nature, right? Finding our place in space where we feel connected and grounded can be really supportive as the moon travels through her home sign of Cancer. And we begin to feel those squares from Venus, then the sun, and then eventually Mercury. Oh, and here we go. I didn't mention that on Friday, it's Friday when Uranus enters gate 8, right? So we did a year and a month in gate 23. And by Friday, Uranus will be in another individual gate, right? So we spent all that time in gate 23 with Uranus, and now we're going to have Uranus in another individual gate, gate 8, the gate of contribution. It's individual contributions to group goals. It's in the channel of inspiration, right? So again, this continues this theme of how is my version or my vision of my individual expression being communicated right now? And how is my authority dealing with that? What does that mean to me? So we continue this deeply mutative theme with Uranus moving into gate 8. And on Saturday, the moon traveling through Cancer at noon, which all of these charts are for noon except the actual new moon. At noon Mountain Time on Saturday, the moon is about to trine that Saturn. So she's in gate 53, and she'll be trining Saturn in gate 22. Now, what's going to happen here that has been a large theme again for the whole year, because we've had so many planets in the sign of the new moon, when the moon passes those planets and goes into all these other astrological signs, she's bringing very conflicted emotions, right? So when she's in Cancer, she's going to be trining elements of the same sign and squaring others. So from the moment she's in Cancer, moving through Leo, she's going to be by herself on that whole side of the chart, right? So as she moves counterclockwise through Leo, Virgo, Libra, etc., all these clumps of planets on the other side of the chart, some of them are going to be soft aspects and some are going to be hard aspects. So we're going to have another month, because of the tightness of the planets and their location, where emotions are really, it indicates they're kind of all over the place, right? Now, again, we have, whether you're defined or undefined, this is a personal exploration I encourage each of you to do, but just say from a transitory aspect, the moon is very stimulating this month. It's like some things may feel smooth and easy, other things may feel restrictive and confining, but again, I think it's just an indicator opportunity. What does that mean for me? How is my authority reacting to that? How am I staying regulated and grounded within my own version of my truth as those unique stimulations happen? But here, as she trines Saturn, this is bringing her and her home sign, emotionally supporting Saturn, the taskmaster, in the gate of grace. How do I feel my emotional energy expressing in social interactions, and to see what that may bring. And as far as the rest of the body graph, there hasn't been any other significant changes at this time, except for, as I mentioned, Friday with Uranus moving into gate 8. But we can track each day and see that by Saturday, Mars is in gate 3, line 4. So he's moving towards 29 degrees Aries, about to leave his home sign by Sunday, the next day. We're going to get this exact square between Mars and Pluto. And here we are. So Sunday, June 9th, we can see that Mars has just entered Taurus after leaving his home sign of rulership. So now he's bringing all that Martian energy into the fixed Earth. And so this is, again, Mars in an Earth sign is not maybe always his most comfortable place, but what it can indicate is that people have a lot of energy to be fixed in their rigidness. And so because we're all undergoing these deep mutative stimulations, I think the awareness here is very supportive to recognize that people can get really entrenched right now, right? Any altercation has opportunity to go significantly in the wrong direction. Mars, Pluto, whew, man, I mean, that's, as I mentioned with the Israeli war, that's how it started. So, I mean, just to recognize that in any conversation, I'm sure we're going to see this in the news, there's going to be conflict. And with Mars, the planet of energy and power, and Pluto being the planet of truth, Lord of the underworld, this is the confrontation of truth to power, or power to truth. But it's very intense energy frequency, And I think, again, just to be aware out in the public world, the collective scene, it's going to be something. We'll just have to see what. But again, I feel like it's just channeling it personally back into who we are. When we look at it from an individual perspective, incredible support right now to really dig into the theme I've been talking about and what is really stimulating your vision of your inspiration that you want to share with the world, that new moon in gate 35. What is my message? Why am I here? And how do I extrapolate and communicate to the public what that is? So really supportive in that regard, because again, look at the body graph. We have, gate Jupiter still in gate 20 with Uranus now in gate 8, these two really big planets stimulating our individual expression. And then that new moon, I think, ties in the idea of how do we share that with others. Also on Sunday and closing out the weekend here, the moon at noon on Sunday will be exactly trine Neptune, and Neptune is still in gate 25. And the moon in gate 56 while this trine is happening. Again, I think it's whenever we think moon trine Neptune, this is the dream world. This is the emotional fantasy land. And so Sunday, as we close out the calendar week, and I'll in my report here that what a wonderful day to reflect on all that, to do that creative work. I really feel like the name of the game right now is to have fun exploring your vision of your creativity, and however that comes out. Doesn't necessarily mean we all need to be artists. I don't consider myself a painter, but I find creativity in certain expressions, and really that's where my reflection is right now. How is my creative juices flowing? And whenever I might be feeling from the harder aspects, some of the challenging limitations of the exterior world, instead of getting lost in that and feeling insecure from all the individual activation, it is a supportive and stimulating time to go into your creative world and whatever that means to you. Because if you're there in that zone, that's where the support is. There is fire. There is really a lot of support for your creative work. And I think that's one of the best messages of the week, in spite of what we may see out there in the outer world. Okay, I think I'm going to take a breath and a drink of water and love to hear from you guys. I see there's some chats. I'm going to read the chat and love to talk about anything you guys want to. Yeah, I hear you, Rachel. I see your comments there. Yeah. It is a lot of stimulation, but I think really, yeah, I'm going to keep that word being adaptable, being flexible right now. This is really the support of all these planets in Gemini. The world is changing. Our structures are falling apart in a sense. We're moving through this massive evolutionary mutation over the next 2 years. And to me, these charts are offering the support to deal with that, to adapt to that. We're moving into a new world, and we're getting support on how we can do that from an inside out, right? I mean, the outside world is an inside job, and that's where these transits have been directing us now so far this year. So again, a lot of support in that regard. Yeah, I don't know, Casey. Not, yeah. I mean, look, on the one hand, this is a chill week. I mean, it's a fun week. I mean, this Venus-Sun conjunction in Gemini, Mercury, Jupiter. I mean, what a great time for us to commune, right? Great time to spend it with friends, talk about our experiences. So, in that sense, it is a very pleasant week. But I think that the challenge becomes for anyone who's not involved in the work we are, this is like what we do, right? We work with human design and other modalities. And so people that are really cultivating this mutation that we're going through, it's a wonderful week. It is supportive in your work. People who are not able, for whatever reason yet, to be involved in that and are still trying to project into the external world, their mental projections of their visions, they're the ones that will meet resistance. They're the ones that, yeah, I mean, it kind of comes down to the self-aligned aware perspective and the unaligned, unaware perspective. And we all oscillate somewhere in there, right? None of us are like perfect or anything, obviously. So that's why I always say, just watch, just observe with your authority. Is this challenging and limiting? Am I dysregulated? No problem. Stop, breathe, return to self, check in with your authority, get grounded with your creativity. So we have modalities and tools that can support us through the challenging weather. I think, again, it just depends on each person's perspective, whether they're going to call it really difficult or not. I think that's why I love transit doing this work, is because being aware of these transits really supports the integration and support that they bring. It's so above, so below, and back and forth again. Anyone else like to share anything? I'm happy to go back into the charts or talk about whatever you guys would like. And if not, that's no problem too. We can wrap it up here. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Wonderful to see you all here on Signpost, and I hope you have a wonderful new moon this week. Thank you very much. And bye for now.